Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. We've got a great session ahead with Brittany Fong. And just a couple of quick housekeeping things. As always, we're going to be recording this, so you can always come back and check it out. We'll also be posting this to the website within about a week, so you can check out the replay. If you have any questions, just put them below the window where we are. We're not going to be answering them during the session, but Brittany and I will do our best to get back to you afterwards. So Brittany, thanks so much for being here.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I just want to show everybody something real quickly so you can give us a little background on it. Let me see if I can find it here. Because you got to tell us the story.
Yep. So that is a picture of me working on part of my car. So in the background, you can see that blue car back there. I have a 95 Honda Del Sol, and this past year I did an engine swap on it, and now it's turbocharged. So in the picture, I'm just soldering the new together.
Nice. So if you have a turbocharged engine in that little car, I'm guessing it goes pretty speedy.
It's pretty good. I mean, it's still kind of a slow car because it's old, but it's definitely faster.
Nice. Well, it's good because that's going to lead perfectly into the first question I have for you. So I have a feeling that your passion for fast cars is as strong as it is for fast dashboards. And I bet you have some good kind of fast and furious stories for us. So can you talk about an idea that our audience could put into place, very quickly, that you've seen make an immediate impact? And can you also talk about kind of what speed bumps they need to watch out for that could slow them down?
Definitely. So the thing that recently I feel like is making the biggest impact on my dashboard building is the design itself and like the whole design process. So it has a huge impact because by doing some of this design or like prep work before I start getting into the building, it's a lot more seamless when I actually build it. And hopefully it ends up being a better product because I've, thought a little bit more through the design. So what does that mean? I like to follow user experience design principles. So things like user flow, categorizing my requirements, and creating wireframes and sketches.
Hmm.
So just a good way to, lay a foundation, figure out where this is going. Another thing would be asking why during the requirement sessions. So I find that a lot of the times clients are asking for something, and if I ask why they want this metric or what it's useful for, then I'm already anticipating what their next question is going to be. So I can already have that built before they even ask me.
Nice.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions. So that's really interesting. So I'm going to work backwards because I don't want to forget this question. So at what point do they get annoyed from you of how many times you ask why?
Sometimes they are like very curious as to why I want to know why. They're like, well, this is what I asked for. Like, why do you need to know why I want
Oh,
this? Yeah. So usually if I just, tell them like, oh, well, I'm trying to figure out like, how to best build this so that it fits your needs because, the more I understand your business and your problems, the better I can design something. Um, they usually don't get too annoyed though.
okay, that's good. I always thought that thing like, oh, ask the 5 whys. I'm like, nah, that's just too many whys. Gotta come up with a different angle. So before you got into this idea of using this user design principles, what were you doing?
So I like to, I'm just one of those people that like to hit the ground running. So I would just go straight into Tableau and start like creating all these different things and then dragging them onto the dashboard and then finding that I created all of these pieces that don't necessarily work together. So
Mm,
coming up with that design ahead of time, yeah, makes it more cohesive, and more of a like, full product.
yeah, I think that's probably how most people operate. Is it still kind of get the data, connect to it, and then just start putting stuff out there and moving it around and kind of seeing where it comes out. And each piece may seem relevant on its own, but then when they start coming together, it doesn't necessarily mesh either as one idea, but also maybe even visually. It's like you have pieces that they just kind of don't work together.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of figure this all out? Were you did it something you already knew? Did you go and do any kind of special training, or you just said, I should probably do this, and you just hacked it together and it started working?
Yeah, so I kind of was already interested in design and user experience. And then I luckily had a manager who was really supportive of this idea, and he sent me to a training for user
Oh,
experience. So then I learned even more about it.
yeah, that helps.
Hmm.
So so what could you share with us, because I'm guessing most people aren't going to have that opportunity to go to any kind of real training the way you did. Is there something that maybe one key thing that you think people are able would without kind of going through that formal training would be able to do that you could give us of to put into practice, or at least starting to try to do something like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I would start with the sketches and like wireframes, because you don't need any tool. You could just use pencil and paper and just kind of start
Mm,
sketching out some of your ideas. Like, maybe this uh, bar chart over time or whatever is going to go at the top, and then we have some details down here. And then along with those sketches would be the user flow. So like I made this graph. Oh, when they click on this graph, they probably want to see information about such and such. So then how are they going to flow over to the next part? So just
mm.
thinking about kind of how the user is going to interact with the end product is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's definitely clearly something you need to do, and I think it is a skill you need to develop over time. So it's something for people to, I think they could practice that idea of sketching. It almost seems, in fact, this is one of the things that I do with people I work with as well, is very design driven, and using techniques like that to just sketch things out, because you don't have to be that detailed, at least not in the beginning. If you're trying to test ideas, you can just be very rough. And a lot of people think it's almost the opposite of what you should do, because they're like, well, I have Tableau. It has all these great features. It's, so easy. Why would
Yeah.
I do it on paper? Why would I do it on paper now?
Yeah. I do find that sketching when you're in meetings is really helpful. Um,
Mm,
it's almost like once you put it on the computer and it looks more polished, like if you made it in Tableau, it looks already kind of ready. People are less willing to be like, well, actually, I don't know about that. But when you're just on a whiteboard or, a piece of paper, it's like, actually, erase that. Let's just put something else there.
I find the same thing. Yeah, that once it starts to look like it's more finished, they're like,
Yep.
oh, okay, that's good enough,
Yeah,
and they
exactly.
don't really give themselves any room to think about it. But when it's on paper or on a board, when it's easy to change, and there's not much on there, like you may just have a couple of bars
Hmm.
just to represent the idea, people don't get so hung up on it. And they certainly also don't start talking about all the little things like colors and fonts and
Yes, definitely.
things that can be distracting, that when you do it in Tableau or any
Yeah.
software, right?
Yep.
So I think that's good practice. So yeah, I think if people could just start sketching as ideas, that would be a great first step for them to pull away and give themselves some, I think, also time to think about it, because you get so engrossed very quickly that because I think even when you work in any software, you then also start fiddling, and you can you can lose sight of what you were trying to do because of that as well.
Yeah. And a lot of the times people will look at the graph and be like, well, that's not right. And then they're not thinking about the design at all anymore. They're looking at the data and they're like, I don't think that's
Mhm.
right. And it's like, well, this is sample data. Like, just calm down.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing is sometimes the data is not ready. And
Hmm.
so you don't if you just want to sketch some things out and you have another team who's putting the data together, you don't have to wait for them to finish so that you can go into Tableau. So there's actually advantages in other ways for moving a project along faster when you do that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's just something people have to get comfortable with because it is a little bit more abstract and they are used to working that way. But like anything, when you're trying something new, you just have to kind of go at it and build it and just try it out and see how it is for you and then use whatever pieces of it you can, I think is helpful. So I really like that idea. So speaking of change and being comfortable, I'll just move on to our second question. Now, we're both consultants, and a lot of times what that means is we have to push clients out of their own comfort zones. And I've found that sometimes have to even get out of our own comfort zone before we can push them. There might be something kind of getting in the way. And when we're working with analytics, we know there's a lot of situations like that that can be pretty tough. And they end up being more around culture and people issues more sometimes than the technology. That tends to sometimes be easier. Having said all that, I'd like to talk about a time when you knew what the client needed, but you first had to get over your own hesitations. And can you talk about why it was hard and how everyone felt at the end?
Yeah. So there's kind of like two scenarios to that. Um, Sometimes it's a pretty simple one, like we want to use stoplight colors, and I can give a quick reason of like, well, that's not great because for color blindness or like 508 compliance, there's like a whole bunch of things that I can say or examples that I can give of why that's not the optimal solution. So those ones are usually a lot easier. Um, but then there are ones where it's like, well, I have this idea of what I want the dashboard to look like. And for lack of better words, I don't really care how you want to do it, but this is how I think it should
Mhm.
be done. Yeah. So in those cases, I usually build what they want, but then I'll also come up with, a solution that I think is maybe going to be better. I also one time was able to sort of trick a client into having a more open mind. So I told them, you have this picture. Let's start on like the cell phone version first. So that basically like already wiped the slate clean of like, oh, well, that was the idea we had for desktop, but you're going to have to look at it a little bit differently on mobile because you don't have the same real estate. So then I put some of my ideas into that mobile version. And then I said, oh, you know what? Like some of these things are actually good. Let's, fix them and put them into our desktop version. So it kind of depends, but not all scenarios work that way. Sometimes you still have to build things that you don't agree with. And that's just kind of how it is.
Well, shame on you for tricking a client.
It was for their own good.
It always is. That's our job, right? I actually like that idea. That's pretty slick that you went in that direction because it kind of removed that kind of that friction between having to talk about what was right or not and look at it, and also probably help them too, actually to look at it with in a fresh way, not just to say, well, those aren't necessarily the right ways to do it, but to think about it from that. And really, actually, it's probably better practice. And at some point, people will get into that mode because really everything is mobile first anyway. But that's a completely different discussion. So I'm curious about a couple of things. So you said you in the case where you had people who were just saying, "I want what I want," and so you said, "Fine, I'll make one copy that's your thing, and then I'll make another one I can show you." So what was what was your hesitation there? Why didn't you kind of, I don't know, find a way? Like, I feel it's, don't take this the wrong way, it's like it wastes time, right? I mean, it's more work for you to like go through that, right? So now you got to make
Yep.
two versions, and you got to, and at some point you have to try to mediate that. So and I know we run into this all the time, right? There's somebody who just says, just that's what I want. I don't care. I mean, that's very common
Hmm.
for people to run into. So how do you deal with stuff like that in maybe a more direct way? Do you have some examples about that?
So the main one I would say that I get is I just want a table, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to.
Mm.
So in those cases, I've actually started using parameters. So I have their table for them, but then I also have a drop down that's like view this visually, and then it puts a graph of the same thing up. Or I've put the graph with like the table directly underneath it so that the graph actually lines up with the table. So it's kind
Hmm.
of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's another one of those tough ones when you have people that are you're trying. I guess in that situation, a lot of it is they're stuck in that. I want to see all the numbers. So and then so you try to appease them. I find there's a little bit of a sidebar, but I find that it kind of goes back to the first thing you were talking about, the why. Because I like to know if somebody says, I want the table, we pretty much all know that if you have a table, even if it's small, but even if, and then if it gets just to be a handful of rows and columns, it's hard to really know what's going on with that, to see a pattern or a trend, whatever. So I
Hmm.
want to know why they want that table. And it could be the answer is, I just like to see the numbers, right? And then you have to say, well, why do you, right? You kind of get into that. But sometimes it's even, I think there's a trust issue that can happen where, especially as you're moving into the visual world, if people aren't used to that in the beginning, they want to see the numbers, not just because they're used to that and that's what they've always had. It's because they may not trust the chart is representing it the right way for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Have you come across that? I see
Yeah.
that quite a bit.
Yeah. So another thing I've started doing is creating a parameter to show or hide the labels. So like I'll have a bar
Mm.
or like for the whole dashboard maybe I'll have the graphs and then you can switch it to turn all the labels on. And then it's also like, well, if you don't believe these numbers, then we should create something that can be used to like, quality check or whatever that's going to help you believe
Hmm.
them. And in that case, maybe it does need to be a table.
Yeah, yeah, I like that idea. By the way, I just want to could you tell people what a parameter is? Because I don't know that, I know that's, we got into a little Tableau speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So a parameter in Tableau is basically just a field where the user can input something. So for the two cases I talked about, the parameter would be like show or hide or table or visual. So the user is just deciding which one they want to see.
yeah, I think those are good techniques because you can satisfy everybody and still move them along and get them closer to the visual side and something like that. It might be a little bit of extra effort just to kind of set it up, but I think it's a way that you can move people past it. I think at some point though, right, you want to get away from that because you don't want them to still kind of. It's like a little kid in there. They got their blanket or they're
Yeah.
sucking their thumb. Eventually, you have to get them wean them off of that behavior
Yeah.
to help, like you said, for their own good
Yeah.
at some point. So yeah, but I like those techniques, and I think uh, giving people options, right, is always doesn't always have to be this or that, right? You're giving them the and,
Yeah. Exactly.
which is what good consultants try to do. Right? So so that's a good way out of it. Uh, that this is good stuff. All right, so let's get to the last part of this. It's usually my favorite one to talk about. So you're walking down the street well, in DC, which could be a little crazy these days. But you're walking down the street and you find a magic lamp. Now, there might be other things you want to wish for, but we're not going to get into that. But in this case, it's an evil genie who escapes and says, Brittany, knows your name, of course. I'm going to take away all your knowledge and skills about analytics and data visualization, except for one. So what's the one skill or piece of knowledge that you would keep?
So I would definitely keep critical thinking or problem solving. Yeah, I feel that even because at one point I didn't have any of these analytical skills, like it's something that I've learned along the way. But being a critical thinker, I've been able to learn all of these skills. So it gives me a basis to look at a problem and then figure out how to solve it by, compartmentalizing, figuring out what step needs to be first, and then just, pick apart the issue. So with the critical thinking, I think I could gain back all of my other analytical skills.
Interesting. Oh, oh, so basically you're tricking them again. I don't know if you can trick an evil genie, but now, so talk about that. I think this is something that comes up a lot because I feel, and tell me if you kind of get this vibe too in your work, that there's this expectation that people just know how to do this kind of thing, right? They're given, whether it was with Excel or PowerPoint or something like Tableau or other software, that you've got the software and yeah, you just know how to put all those pieces together. It's like being, a detective or forensic scientist, or that those are hard skills. So how did you go about learning that?
How to think critically?
Yeah, because it's not right. It's not just like learning where a feature or function and how that operates, or a rule about how something works. It's a whole process.
Yeah. Well, it starts with figuring out the steps, definitely. Like when you look at a problem and you try to take it all in at once, it's going to be overwhelming and intimidating. So it's really like breaking it down and being like, okay, if this is the end goal, what are the things that I need to do along the way to get there? Um, so yeah, just kind of breaking it up, taking it step by step.
So doesn't that take a long time? Shouldn't it? Wasn't it just easier to start? We won't just jump into Tableau because we already talked about that's not good. But wouldn't it just be easier to start? Just make your sketches and kind of figure it out. Because
I mean, you'll probably eventually get there. It may just not be the optimal use of your time. It's like, I guess, going back to working on the car, like I can have the wrong tools and I'll eventually get there. It probably is going to be much more of a headache than if I had the right tools. But it will work.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that analogy because I think this is an area that it's actually, there's both sides. I think from the work that you're doing, where you're trying to put together the visual story, and you want to put right. You say, well, I'm going to go through this critical thinking to put the pieces together. There's another side to it that I think really doesn't go recognized, which is the audience, and that they're not necessarily critical thinkers either. They have to do it in a different way, right? But I think there's also this assumption that, let's just go through your example, right? So you've got user design. So you've got it's going to be a great user design. You are really good at using the Tableau, right? So you know how to author the visuals, and then you've got the critical thinking. So you put the story together kind of in the right way, and all the pieces are there. And now you hit the publish button and now it goes to some wide audience. And there's this expectation that all those people can now use it, right? And you've got all the right things. You've got instructions and you've got the right use, right? That's all great. What about those people? What are you seeing? I mean, when you work with your clients, do you run into that where you've given it to them, but they're still not at the same skill level from that critical thinking side?
Yeah, so that goes back to the design process and knowing your audience. So if I create something that I think is really, um, really sound, it's well put together, but I find myself having to like walk the client through and being like, this is what this means and this is what this does. Then it's really, I need to go back and do something that fits them better.
So how does that go? Is that just because you're learning something along the way through that review process and they just get a look on their face and you can tell that they're just puzzled? Uh,
Yeah. And
how do we recognize that so that people don't just, right? My greatest fear for people is always that lack of response is actually worse than getting a response.
yeah, that's true. Um, so how does that go when that happens? I would say usually it pulls me all the way back to the beginning of the design and it's like, okay,
Uh,
let's talk through the requirements again. Like, can you basically I take it as I took it the wrong way. So let me go back and understand
mhm.
again what you need. Whether that's visualizations that you're already familiar with or um, you know, ways of looking at the data that you're already used to, something like that. And then once you have that, you can start to build in those additional layers, but you have to do it, one at a time instead of just throwing the entire thing at them.
Yeah, I think you show a lot of wisdom and courage in what you just said, because I think there's always this pressure, right, to get the project done and to say, look, I'm just not, it doesn't seem right. It's like on the assembly line of cars. We're back to cars, right? You always hear about the person can pull the red cord on the
Yeah,
assembly line when they think, hey, something's wrong, we should stop here. But it's great that you're doing that because you know that in the end the result will be better. Because what's going to happen? If you don't do it, it's going to happen anyway.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Inevitably, you're just delaying it.
Right. So why not tackle it? And I think that's a great thing for people to realize, that even though you think you're getting something done faster, you're actually probably slowing down because the goal is not to get something out the door. The real goal is to help people get something that can help them make an impact in their work, right? So if you're slowing that down by maybe, avoiding these kinds of issues, I mean, you've talked about a lot of key things that people might be thinking, I don't want to do that. That's just going to make it take longer and longer and longer, right? I got to design it. I got to sketch it. I got to meet with them more and all, right? But we know, even in our hearts, I think sometimes, that what we should be doing is pulling that red cord and taking that step back. Uh, so I think that's a good lesson for people to take away from this, is to think about those kinds of things, that what might seem like it's slowing your project down actually may speed it up towards its end goals, which is
Yeah,
counterintuitive.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it seems silly to keep going down the wrong path.
But how often does it happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It seems silly, but for some reason I think it's just held over from how things have been done. And so it's great that people like you are helping organizations and talking about this, so that eventually these kinds of changes can start to be more accepted and looked on as like, we need to do that, even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable. We've got to do that for our own good in the future, right? Because the use of data is only going to accelerate and become even more important. So adopting these kinds of transitions is more critical to success, to be doing that kind of thing now.
Yeah. And usually, if you remind them that if this isn't built well, people aren't going to use it. So that was a waste of our time, then they're a little more willing to be like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe you're right.
We should just get T-shirts with something like that. Just come up with, that's a little too long to say, but it's probably
Yeah.
like at the beginning of a project, having that is a good reminder. That way they just
Mhm.
see it right in front of them all the time, right? Well, on that note, I see we're right at the about 30-minute mark, so I just want to close up. This was great. Some really good ideas. I think our audience can pick from any of those and start. And I encourage them to not worry about the order that we talked about them, or that it has to be through user design first and all that. Any of these things that Brittany's talked about, if you do one of them, it's going to make a big difference for you. So thanks again. Good luck on your cars.
Thanks.
And again, we all appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks for having
Bye.
me.
Bye.